It's all yours, William, please.
All right. So can y'all hear me? Mic check.
We got you.
Okay. So this is an introduction to stacked capsule autoencoders. I just want to point out that I borrowed one slide from Hinton and several slides from Sabor for the sake of time. All right. What to expect from this presentation? Expect more of an overview of capsules so we know roughly what problem they're trying to solve. And I would appreciate discussion about capsules from people who read the paper or have prior knowledge. Don't expect a detailed description of every equation, section of paper, and architectural module. I tried, but it just wasn't going to happen. Okay. So from Hinton, this is basically from his 2019 talk. Just so everyone knows, capsules are an attempt to correct all problems of CNNs. Every year there's a different version of capsules. That's important to know because if you've heard of capsules, you may have heard about it any time between now and in 2011 when his first paper was written. Most of all the papers about capsules with Hinton's name on them are in the thread that I posted along with several blog entries about like a much more high level description from of all the different capsule papers. Some talks as well are in that thread, but it's basically in his 2019 talk, he declared that the old versions were obsolete. So that's one reason I chose this paper is because if you can skip it and do the latest and greatest, why not? So I would say that all those papers are worth reading. There's some pretty interesting ways that they wire together the older capsules, but I'm not going to talk about it. The previous versions use discriminative learning and use matrices to represent part-whole relationships. The 2019 version uses unsupervised learning and uses matrices to represent whole-part relationships. So probably the most important thing is that this version's unsupervised. Something that Hinton makes clear on most of his presentations is that like if you listen to any of the people that won the Turing Award with him, they all want to crack the unsupervised egg as much as they can because in reality it's really expensive to tell a neural network model every answer that you wanted to learn. It would be much better if they could learn on less data and like model the world without instruction to some extent. And that's the reason that this is the latest and greatest, is because it starts to crack that egg. So from Sarah Sabor, I borrow the following few slides. Basically, so this introduction is basically, so if I were to give you this image and ask you to memorize it in a very short amount of time and then reconstruct it, there's like a series of steps that you would likely do and everyone tends to do. And it's an indicator of how they're trying to approach capsules. So what you would do is some form of sparse pattern recognition where you, instead of trying to remember every pixel, you would try to remember shapes and patterns and then sets of patterns. So you would like remember that perhaps that like there's like a square here and a triangle here, and you would piece them together like by how close the square and the triangle are, rather than memorize all like 7 pixels on the left and however many pixels there are on the right. And that's sort of what he is meant by the whole part or part-whole relationships, is that first you're sort of doing like a bottom-up assembly of the whole in order to have a concise representation in your mind of what you're trying to recognize. Some other things that capsules are supposed to solve is like dealing with clutter. So if you have this MNIST data set with like instead of just having regular MNIST, you have 2 digits superimposed on one another so that they're like you're trying to make it so that the neural network has to be able to pull apart the two different pieces. And basically that's a harder problem that Capsule is trying to solve. Let's see, but the one that he talks about the most in his presentations, Hinton, is that is viewpoint. So viewpoint is probably the key here. So this is interesting. So like you'll have a training set where you have the objects oriented one way, but if you like look at the plane, you can see that in the test set the plane's been like rotated. So the test set, it's more important that it's able to identify the same object with a different affine transformation than it is to be able to recognize exactly the same picture. So you're getting away from like all.
William, is this like the system never sees any rotations of the object and it has to figure out the kind of the rotation invariant representation, or the training data set contains some rotations? Like how are they thinking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really remember for sure. I mean, I think that I don't know. I don't want to say because I don't know for sure. But anyway, viewpoint equivariance. So basically, CNNs that have an inductive bias that is viewpoint invariant to translation, and it does this by gridding. So basically, it's a really useful inductive bias. It basically assumes that if features are useful in one location, that features will be useful in another location. And that's what CNN's inductive bias is useful for. In the introduction of the Stack Capsule autoencoder paper, Hinton talks about how it might be like it's tempting to just introduce other inductive biases, like other affine transformation degrees of freedom, such as like scale and like other things, I guess, rotation, and see. But the problem is when you try to induce too many inductive biases rather than try to abstract away some of that, you end up with these massive feature vectors, and it becomes unwieldy. Basically, the question is should you try to introduce more inductive biases or change the architecture altogether? And their answer was to change the architecture. So the motivations for why they changed the architecture is I'm going to try to provide intuition on. So basically, you see this probably as a house, or and the reason what's constant here. Well, even though the size changes and roughly data augmentation occurs, but like the relationship of the square piece to the triangular piece is roughly the same. The vectors that would represent this are roughly the same. And so basically, I mean, the capsules are trying to do something that Hinton says was kind of a problem with neural networks. It's like apparently like neural networks at one computer vision was primarily focused on like vectors at one point, or they wanted to be, but then neural networks started doing really well, and they weren't focused on like the vectors anymore to do like object recognition. They were just focused on doing the object recognition, but we still would like to be able to like create these vector graphics from the data set. So because Hinton probably wants to do it for multiple reasons. He probably wants to do it because it's useful, but my guess is also because he thinks that that's what we do, because you can sort of imagine a scene and sort of walk around the scene, and it gets bigger, and like things that you can walk around objects and they change if you have a strong imagination. Sometimes it's difficult, but if you work at it, you can do those things, and that doesn't seem to be something that a CNN would be able to do particularly well, based on what they talk about in this paper.
Yeah, so something he says that sort of stuck with me was that when you think about an object, you basically think about it in some viewpoint, which is mostly the same for that object, no matter, when you think about it. Like if you, he quotes some papers on like how the human brain works to sort of underline that, but he says something like, uh, people think about objects, they think about like a tree from the front, right? Not from like below the tree, looking up at the tree, but like if you think of a tree, you think of this sort of archetypical, tree from the front that has like leaves. If you think of a house, you think of this sort of square with a triangle house, like the object house is like some sort of archetypical way of being in our brain. And he sort of relates that to, we think more about parts than, and like at different skills, just like William said, then we think about like features, right? Because in convolutional neural networks, we have these sort of, it's not invariant to anything, right? If you think about like a house, you think about this archetypical house, but you can scale it in your mind very, very easily, or flip it around and that sort of stuff.
Well, I wonder if this is a human thing or primate thing versus actually how the recognition system works, like the visual system, right? Because
yeah, I think he says mammals in the paper. The papers refer to like papers on mammals, so it's not per se humans, but it's something we can easily imagine for ourselves as well.
so, like, do we require this abstract notion of things, or we can just rely on the instantaneous textures, say? Because I'm thinking of humans and language and symbols, because what we have on the slide and what you just said, Eloy, it's like symbols. It's already a language. You decompose the scene into, it's not even like vector quantization anymore. It's actual words or something, abstract notions. And then you're like, okay, this is a triangle.
Right. And something is, I think one of the papers he quotes is this paper on when we think about mathematics and proving mathematics, our grid cells, they fire because we think about walking around in a space when we think about mathematics and abstract concepts like that. So it's more.
Yeah, but that's back to Kant, the Königsberg philosopher. The brain can only think about like space and time. Like all the brain does is like has to be in space and time.
Right, but that's what he's trying to say with like the viewpoints, is that we, we think of things as like parts where we place ourselves in, and we can sort of easily manipulate our viewpoint of an environment.
Yeah, and it's also a failure of CNNs. So it's like, there's some similar failures in our perceptions, but like if you, one big thing that everyone notices with CNNs is that they don't do well in things that aren't in the training set. And like, even if they're rotated like slightly, they're not rotationally invariant. Like if you turned a person's face sideways and there had never been any facial rotation in the data, in the data, it would fail, but a human wouldn't. And one of the like viewpoint is sort of like one of the ways he describes that. Like if you make slight changes to the perspective that you're taking on the object that you're recognizing, those slight changes in perspective destroy a CNN without like massive amounts of data augmentation or a large training set. But you're basically trying to reduce how much training data you need to be able to still identify things from different perspectives.
I'm kind of wondering if you could do this by, rather than, trying to, increase the training set, you just create an RNN that is just rotating objects in space in your own mind, or, scaling them. Because when I looked at your example, like, 2 slides ago, I was like literally just physically rotating whatever I was seeing in my own mind.
Right.
I don't know how they're training, but when I saw that, presentation where the RNNs are dreaming and, creating their own stuff to like help them learn, I was wondering, you could just create something that just
that's an interesting idea. Because like it seems like that they're learning like a single affine transformation where it goes from like what they see to exactly what they can identify. But what you're saying is that maybe there's like a series of small affine transformations that you kind of have to like do a search on. That sounds like not a bad idea.
Viewpoint invariance isn't an app.
Something that also that was reminiscent to me was the Thousand Brains theory by Jeffrey Hawkins, where he says like every part of our body is sort of mapped to parts of our frontal cortex, and every sort of like we have different objects that each part can recognize. Like your fingers can recognize a mug. Like, okay, so you have 1,000 brains, and each brain maps to a part of your body, and that little brain can sort of recognize objects. So if your thumb says it's a coffee mug, your index finger says it's a coffee mug, and your middle finger says it's a bee, they vote for coffee mug. Like they sort of like mix all of the objects your whole body sort of expects together. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it made me think of like a Thousand Brains theory basically says, you know, we perceive like objects, which is kind of similar to this in the way that they try to like create templates of objects from like an image, basically.
All right. So he refers to these, the thing that stays constant is coordinate frames, I guess, or at least that concept is relevant. So like, I thought this was kind of interesting, and I may be wrong in saying this, but so like one way I thought about that. So the example he gives, I wish I had put it in here, but it's like, he gives a couple of them. He gives like a map of like Africa on its side and asks you what country it is, and it almost looks like Australia. And if you don't know that it's been translated, you'll like kind of be like, what? And you need to like, in another example he gives you is a box and a diamond. Like if he tells you that like something that's a rectangular on an axis is a box, then you'll like check to see if it has right angles. And notice very small changes in the right angles. And if he tells you it's a diamond, you won't check for those. And then it'll basically appear like a different object, even though it's the same thing you're looking at. One thing that's funny to me is that, like, I don't know if this is the same concept, but like if I'm on a diet and I've been good on my diet for a while, and like some food disappears in the house that's not on my diet, my wife will think she ate it. And I just think that that's kind of the same thing, but but anyway, so so coordinate frames, they're important to us in order to recognize things, and you can manipulate that fact to your advantage if you're me, like trying to get off your diet without getting caught. And so they're important to the capsules. So capsules, basically, they do one extra thing other than CNNs. Instead, like, I mean, it's an oversimplification, but CNNs tell you whether features exist and propagate that throughout the layers. Capsules tell you whether a feature exists and also how it's oriented, like the pose in relation to the viewpoint. So that's important. So all right, so we're getting closer to the sort of the meat of it. So basically, you need to have like whether a feature exists and its pose, and basically these three different vectors would be like three different capsules. And if they matched in relative orientation, then you could predict that there's a house there. So this is another way of representing that same fact. So the lower layers of MNIST, you would see something that like a stroke. So these, let me pull up some pointer options, laser pointer. So these lower layers, basically, like they would notice only the stroke, and then there would be several different pieces that would recognize the stroke, and like they would all be mapped to like a different parent. So like there would have to be like 3 or 4 different strokes to be like to activate a specific capsule, and enough for it to potentially be passed on to the next layer. And each one of the activations can only have one parent. So what this ends up doing is creating something like a parse tree of the image. They describe it as, so like different images will activate the next layer in a different way. So in order to identify this as a 3, you basically create this parse tree that says that like there's all these different strokes and their relative position is in such that you can say that this is a 3. That's what like the takeaway from this would be.
How's that different from a feed forward or CNN even?
Well, I think the CNN appears to be aware of relative position much more and viewpoint more than it is. So like I think that so if you rotated this 3, because there's like a sequence of affine transformations learned, if you rotated this 3, you would get the same structure here of activations throughout the network. But in a CNN, you might just have like parts of the network stop being activated. I mean, that's the best intuition I can think to say. It might become a little bit more clear as we go on. Part capsule segment, the input into parts and their poses. The poses are then used to reconstruct the input by affine transforming learned templates. Object capsules try to arrange inferred poses into objects, thereby discovering underlying structure. The SCAE is trained by maximizing image and part log likelihood subject to sparsity constraints. So they do classification in a unsupervised way.
Can I interrupt real quick? I'm sorry. Is this very similar to SIFT? Because I feel like I remember like scale invariant feature transform, where they have like coordinate frames like back in the 2000s in image. They also use very similar. It doesn't matter if you don't know, but I don't know. It looks similar. It's just that this one is an autoencoder and that one wasn't. But okay.
Yeah. So one thing there's an unsupervised training process where they basically are able to demonstrate that they are able to find the 10 classes of MNIST mapped into a lower dimensional space in a way that's clearly separable. And it does this without any labels. So that's nice. The one thing that I've noticed from a lot of Hinton's one of Hinton's interviews a long time ago that I saw is that he views MNIST. I think he's quoted as saying that MNIST is kind of like or CFAR10 or something, is like the fruit fly of machine learning. So it's like biologists use the fruit fly to study like small concepts they're trying to, like this is like, until he gets the problem working well for MNIST and CFAR10 and that sort of thing, he's not moving on to like MRIs. So this isn't at a scale that's ready for our work. But that's the space that Hinton likes to work in, is like the problem, just making the machine learning algorithm work on the theoretical problems. And then it seems like he kind of farms the harder work out to other people. Anyway, so there's like some process that I didn't put in the slides because of time, but basically there's like some sort of like creation of bipartite graphs in order to figure out the decision boundaries in the space in order to do classification. But I'm sorry, I didn't put that in the slides. So for the most part, this is where it gets even less pleasant. Let's see. All right, I'm going to switch to presenter view. Can you all still see the screen?
We can.
All right, so basically, there's not too many slides left, but just for the sake of pain, I'm going to attempt to poorly explain the math in this. So there's the constellation autoencoder. So let X 1 to M be a set of two-dimensional input points. where every point belongs to a constellation. So constellation is like that, like try to recreate the points on the screen from your memory. Those the constellations were like related points. We first encode all input points, which take the role of part capsules with a set transformer, HCAPS, based on attention mechanisms in the K objects. So that's where this K comes from. An object capsule K consists of a capsule feature vector CK, its presence probability AK, and between 0 and 1. A 3x3 object viewer relationship matrix, which represents the affine transformation between object constellation and the viewer. So that's what this is. Basically, this is kind of like the first layer in the hierarchy of capsules, is my understanding. Every object capsule, which is like the next layer, uses a separate multi-layer perceptron, H part K, to predict n less than or equal to m part candidates from the capsule feature vector CK. Each candidate consists of the conditional probability AKN element of 0 to 1 that gives that a given candidate part exists, an associated scalar standard deviation, and a 3x3 object part relationship matrix, which represents the affine transformation between object capsule and candidate part. Candidate predictions are given by the product of the object capsule OV and the candidate OP matrices. We model all input points as a single Gaussian mixture. If anybody wants to explain Gaussian mixtures, I would appreciate it, because I didn't have time to look it up. But I'm sure that's a concept that deserves plenty of slides. So I apologize for that. We modeled all input points as a single Gaussian mixture where mu kn and lambda kn are the centers and standard deviations of the isotropic Gaussian components. The model is trained without supervision by maximizing the likelihood of the part capsules in equation 5. So this is one of the equations they use to train the model.
What is n again, William? So m is number of your samples, right? A number of your training samples. The capital M is number of your training samples. Capital K is number of components in the mixture. What is N?
I think it's a candidate prediction. So it's like if you have you remember, like if you have like these parts that lead to a house, if you have the box part, that's one of N. But you have to have multiple candidates match in order to
you think of them as the parts, like N parts?
I think so. That's what the candidate it's like. So basically you have to have a bunch of the parts match in order to predict to activate the next layer's capsule. Yeah,
I was just trying to interpret this AK weighting factor in front of the probability as a cosine distance, but I'm not sure. Okay, I need to...
Yeah, they talk about cosines. I think probably they use cosines in one of their papers. I'm not sure they use it in this paper, I think, for some reason, but I don't remember why. So the model is trained without supervision by maximizing the likelihood of part capsules in equation 5, subject to sparsity constraints. I don't go into too much detail on the sparsity constraints, but I do mention them later. So the part capsule is sort of like the next layer of capsules. So this is basically, when I'm talking about layers, I'm talking about like, we're kind of working I think the first slide I'm talking about the math is down here. And then like, it's like, we're working up the layers. So, okay, this is a little bit more intuitive. Explaining images as geometrical arrangements of parts requires 1, discovering what parts are there in an image, and 2, inferring the relationships of the parts to the viewer, their pose. For the CCAE, which was the previous slide, a part is just a 2D point that is a XY coordinate, but for the PCAE, which is this slide and this, I think the next layer up in capsules, each part capsule M has a 6-dimensional pose, XM, 2 rotations, 2 translations, scale and shear, a presence variable DM. I think that, I mean, this sentence probably is the meat of how it's not doing the same thing of what CNN is doing, and the fact that it's learning like scales, shear, and translation. Let Y element of 0, 1 be the image scale between 0 and 1. We limit the maximum number of part capsules to M. So I mean, just remember that you have to have parts matched to create the whole. Use an encoder to infer their poses XM, present probabilities DM, and special features ZM element of RCZ. The templates TM element of 0 to 1, height, width, and number of channels plus 1 are smaller than the image, but have an additional AFL channel, which allows occlusion by other templates. The image is modeled as a spatial Gaussian mixture. Not sure what this means. I didn't have time to look it up. Training the PCA results in a learning of templates for object parts, which resemble strokes in the case of MNIST. So this module will end up learning like portions of a digit, not the whole digit, like wherever you might lift your pen or something, or change the angle significantly. Object capsule autoencoder. This section is probably a little even more confusing than the last two, but having identified parts and their parameters, we would like to discover objects that could be composed of them. To do so, we use concatenated poses, XM, special features, ZM, and flattened templates, TM, which convey the identity of which part capsule as input of the previous capsule differs from the first capsule in the following ways. First, we feed part capsule presence probabilities DM into this capsule. These are used to bias the set transformer's attention mechanism, not to take absent points into account. Secondly, DMs are also used to weigh the part capsule's log likelihood so that we do not take log likelihood of absent points into account. This is implemented by raising the likelihood of the mth part capsule to the power of DM. These equations are pretty similar. There's a relationship. I really couldn't. I know that these are probabilities. I know these are the M candidate capsules. I don't remember what K is, but clearly I didn't understand the math fully just because I haven't worked with it. I find that like that it's much easier to explain something that I've dealt with the code than something that I'm just reading. The OCAE is trained by maximizing the part pose likelihood of this equation. This is intuitive. Therefore, every part pose is explained as an independent mixture of predictions from object capsules, where every object capsule makes exactly M candidate predictions, or exactly 1 candidate prediction per part. So these basically these are making candidate predictions, and they need to match in order to activate the next layers. Achieving sparse and diverse capsule presences. So stacked capsule autoencoders are trained to maximize pixel and part log likelihoods. If not constrained, however, they tend to either use all or part of the object capsules to explain every data example, or collapse onto always using the same subset of capsules, regardless of the input. They are unstable without sparsity constraints. See a paper for a detailed discussion on sparsity constraints used to stabilize capsules training. The one thing that I can think that I took away from at least his lectures is that one of the factors of sparsity is how these lower level capsules map to a single parent. So like all these non-existent weights allow for some sparsity. I don't know much more than that about the sparsity. So this is what the architecture looks like put together. I didn't think that this paper did a particularly effective job of making this intuitive, but that's fine. There's a lot of resources online about how it works because it's Hinton, and I put some of those in the thread if you're interested. The GitHub blog post is particularly good at describing this.
I don't see the autoencoder part in this. This just looks like a prediction. Or am I missing something?
So the losses. I think the autoencoder probably is reflected in the part likelihoods. I don't really know. One of the losses is handling the training process, of course. I think the way it's an autoencoder is that it's able to create reconstructions. Basically, after you do the training process, you're able to get this, get these. So this is SVHN, and I've worked with SVHN, so it's kind of a weird. It's like a much harder version of MNIST. You're trying to identify. It's something about house numbers or signs or something. Basically, it's like real world digits on signs, and you can see like the 0. Their reconstructions are colorless, and I don't know why that is. But they capture sort of like the important essence of what the 0 is, but they're not capturing the color that's in the training set. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But essentially, they're demonstrating that they're able to do some level of reconstruction. SVHN is historically quite difficult on unsupervised classification so far. These are the results of unsupervised classification on the data sets that have been mentioned in the paper. So they're able to get pretty ideal performance on using this the capsules, but their performance on SVHN is still not that great compared to supervised training, but it's probably pretty good for unsupervised training on SVHN so far. I'm sure there's plenty of work left to do, and just remember that every year there's a new capsule, so this is probably far from what he would declare victory on. But for the most part, that's the presentation, and I definitely apologize that at least the last 3 or 4 slides about the math were not very well understood. I just ran out of time. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you, William. No need to apologize. Yeah, lots of work. So let's discuss, or what are any comments? It was good that we had a chance to insert our comments while you were going, but
yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's also good that I ran under probably a little bit, because you'll had, if I might not have, I probably would have ran over if anyway. I would say that the just the important takeaways is maybe just that they're trying to relate part-whole relationships in a way that he claims that CNNs don't capture, and that there is a something like a image parse tree being created. I think that's probably pretty fascinating. And also remember that being able to identify different poses without explicit training on every pose is an important part of capsules. I think that it's definitely not at a place where it's going to work with our problems as well as CNNs probably, but I think that in some ways it might be solving my problem a little bit. Not necessarily solving my problem, but solving it's like, I think one thing that we're trying to do is capture the vector graphic representation of the segmented brain. I don't know if this would ever do that, but the idea that this is trying to capture the vector graphics of pose without explicitly extraining every pose is interesting. I think that it's possible that, I mean, somebody mentioned that maybe some of this is done in a recurrent fashion in the human brain. I think that's an interesting possibility. Some other things that I think are interesting is, like, it seems like he's breaking this up into, where is it? Yeah, it seems like he's breaking this into like 3 main stages. I kind of feel like maybe that there might be more stages than that, or the stages might be more complex than he is modeled in his solution. But I think that that's okay. I think that I try to, like, my expectations from anyone who's trying to get out of our local minimum of CNN solutions are pretty low. Like, I think it's fine that he's working on small toy data sets like MNIST. I think it's fine that he's not perfectly modeling the human brain. I think that the kind of the history of evolution and the history of evolution within computer science and machine learning is that it doesn't have to be a perfect representation of the solution. It just needs to be a step in the right direction, and then hopefully somebody else will grab it and take it a few steps closer. I don't think this is anywhere close to the human brain yet, but I think it's probably at least a step in a direction that makes you think.
Yeah, in William, it's interesting, the SIFT connection, in terms of standing on the shoulder of giants kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I give a lot. I'm pretty charitable to this. I have a lot of like, I have some theoretical physics friends, and theoreticians don't necessarily feel like they have to solve applied problems, and that's fine. That leaves plenty of fruit for us to solve and other people. So I don't know if there will ever be a problem where this will be useful to us, but I did see some person use this on some medical problem. I don't remember what it was. I should, does anybody have any idea of where maybe this might be of use? I mean,
it's interesting because, like, especially that I'm like more and more, like, I'm listening to more and more talks. I feel like you can solve the same problem in multiple different ways, even, like, invariance or whatever. And yeah, I mean, the one thing I'm a little confused is why this paper chose to compare against CNNs when, MNIST, literally, I mean, everybody uses MNIST to show that they can separate everything out. But yeah, I mean, I feel like you could definitely get, I mean, they just, even a regular autoencoder, you can, just push everything apart, and it's obviously better than the CNN for MNIST. But I like this approach because it feels like it's literally using SIFT features in the, like, latent space. Because, I got the SIFT idea the moment you showed me the 3-vector thing. That's literally all SIFT is, just using their little coordinate transforms. But I mean, yeah, I haven't looked at it for ages, so I don't know the details. And when you looked at the math, it looked very, very confusing. But yeah, I definitely think it makes sense why you would use it. Whether or not the brain employs it, I'm not sure. As I said, there's multiple ways of solving it. You can just, you could basically rotate objects in your own mind and then, compare them. We're actually getting coordinate transforms and then, going to invariant space. That could also be possible. have no idea which one we're doing.
Yeah, so Hinton has a lot of papers. This series of capsule papers, I think there's a few which specifically try to link this sort of idea to the brain. Because obviously, like Hinton is very, very brain based. Like I think this year he also published a paper on how you can do back propagation in the brain and that it's more feasible than people thought before and that sort of stuff. It was in Nature Comms, I think. So obviously he's very brain based. And I think I read something about like mixing capsule networks or something. It's a more cited paper on capsule networks. And I think there he's more clear about like the link he thinks it has with the brain. But yeah, I agree. It's reminiscent of a lot of different techniques that don't necessarily have something to do with CNNs.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention, even though I didn't talk about it much, is that CNNs are still part of this. They just are a very early part. They're still kind of used as feature detectors early on, but there's that they're built upon to give you those vectors that help you learn pose. So,
which makes sense in the brain in terms of like the first few, visual cortices are probably similar to CNN. It's just a question about like at a certain point, it probably isn't a CNN anymore. It's like an RNN or maybe something like this. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that one thing I think about when I think about how close we are to the brain or not is like like when you're like middle school or something, somebody always asks like, does everybody see color the same way? And like later on in life, or maybe at that point, you figure out no, not everybody sees color the same way. And yet you wouldn't call a colorblind person not conscious or not whatever, not alive. I think there's probably some variability in all of the modules of the brain within human beings, but not enough to be as large as the variability between a CNN and our brain. I mean, that's a massive difference in how things are done. But like basically,
I wonder about that.
If you look at things as like a pipeline, like in every module is sort of like gets the answer correct some percentage of the time and not correct the other parts of the time. Like basically, it seems like the evolution is to create like more robust pipelines, more complicated pipelines, but the modules, like, how much would a single module in your brain have to change before you wouldn't consider that person like human or like I don't know. There's probably like this rant or rambling is just to kind of get people to think like, what spectrum of solutions could still lead to outcomes similar to ours? Do they have to be do they have to be exactly the same or not? I think you can probably have quite different solutions to the same problem, and as long as the problem gets solved downstream, it doesn't matter too much. So I think that there's probably a room for a very large space of solutions to everything we do.
Yeah, I think,
go for it.
Yeah, I think that this is mostly his way of trying to solve like compositionality, because one of his earlier works, he basically hates max pooling, and he basically hates the way that we pass features through CNNs. And so he wants there to be like he wants there to be relationships between the objects that.
Yeah. So that's something I didn't talk about, but I'm glad you brought that up. So the max pooling thing, one thing he talks about is, so that's one way CNNs deal with pose, or this concept of pose is that because like if you move the image just a little bit, that max pooling results in roughly the same activations. It's kind of like CNN's way of dealing with small changes in the image, but it's not good enough to do what everyone wants CNNs to do, which is like behave like a human being. So this is just his attempt at getting closer. But the idea that max pooling is a very imprecise way at dealing with small changes in images is probably correct, I would think. So at least that observation is good. Whether he took a step in the right direction of solving that problem is debatable.
Yeah, and generally he's just trying to solve for better compositionality, whether it be for pose, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm all in favor of that, but it's hard.
Is
It is.
Sergey still here?
Yeah. I will need to go to the faculty meeting in a bit, but think about the following. It's kind of reflecting to your rant that augmentation. Well, when the face is upside down, the human will eventually recognize the face. But there've been a lot of studies done when by the
It's not
delay
perfect.
say that maybe other systems kick in. That's one side of my statement. Another side of the statement is most of our brain is just a mechanical device. We have like 20% in neocortex, but the rest does exactly the same thing given exactly the same stimulus. So it's just like all the neurons, they're like machines. They will do exactly the same thing. There's no thinking, no abstract modeling. So maybe CNNs are still good for like the first parts of the vision system. And then there is like a widget at the end that's kind of like, okay, let's abstractly modify that. So I just those two statements, reflection on your rant, not my rant.
Yeah. The first part of what you were saying is kind of reminds me of Amrit's idea with the RNNs and like how you might have to like search this space of like adjacent translations and then build upon that like a tree. But yeah.
Yeah, but very, very interesting topic. Thanks. I will anyways stop the recording now so it has time to process. And there is one thing though, Neural Information Processing Systems conference that is happening 6 to 12 for students. Registration is just $25. I suggest everyone register and go through it and pick a couple of talks that are interesting. And let's have like last meeting of the year when everyone shows a slide with a couple of interesting talks from that conference. And then we'll have some best papers selected for next year for discussions. Like I myself won't be able to attend all the talks. This conference from home thing doesn't work for me. It's like I have to be there to be forced to watch people talk, but maybe I'll find 2 talks as well, or 2 papers. Let's combine the forces. It'll cost $100 for non-students. So $25, such a bargain, please. Okay.